I've been taking stock in my mind of things that have happened in the last couple of years, thinking about the things that we've learnt from it, some of the mistakes that we've made, just trying to get clear as we go into 2023, the sort of things that we might look forward to. And I was thinking about the pandemic and how lucky we've been to have such a marvellous and benevolent government that's tried to look after us during a health crisis. A government that was so interested in our health and well-being that when a pandemic was spreading across from China and going through Europe and then coming into this country, had formulated a plan, although different from perhaps an original plan for a pandemic, that they decided, that in order to look after us and make sure that we were okay, they would ensure that we stayed at home and worked from home where possible. And then they would somehow find amazing amounts of money and pay some of us, although not all of us, enough money to get by, while some of us then had to go to work. And I thought how marvellous that all is. And in fact, the NHS had been terrific. We went outside and smashed pots of pans together and clapped our hands in favour of them. And it was a wonderful experience to know that such a lovely government was able to take so much care of us and ensure that we had all those wonderful masks that we enjoyed wearing. But at the same time, thinking on and looking at the evidence that's come out now, we've realised that perhaps some of these measures were perhaps not the best measures that could have been done. Now, I make mistakes all the time. Goodness gracious, I've made so many blunders in my life, I'm embarrassed to mention them. But when I do make mistakes or say the wrong things, I do try where possible, although people may say that's not true. I do say, oh, do you know what? I got that wrong. Fair enough. And sometimes I change my mind as well. I'll have my mind over in this camp, as it were, and I'll think this is the best thing to do. And then somebody will say something or some evidence will come up and I'll think, do you know what, actually, I think I was wrong there. I've changed my mind. It's only natural. And I'm sure that governments, particularly nice and benevolent governments that have got our best interests at heart, would definitely change their minds if they were to look at the evidence. I know they're very busy, so looking at the evidence perhaps is something that will take them a bit of time to get round to. But should anything like this ever happen again, I think they must now start to realise that locking people in their homes with all the problems that would entail, the mental health issues, the cruelty for the children being stuck at homes, the fact that we're going to pay people not to work and the results of that with a big financial crisis. I imagine that they would have been learning these lessons and thinking, blimey, do you know, yeah, actually, although we thought we were doing the right thing, maybe we weren't. And there again, that whole business about not letting anybody go to the hospital who was ill or going to your GP. Maybe people have learnt from that. Or not being able to sort of treat something that was readily available on the shelf for that virus that we were all worried about. Maybe, hopefully, people have now learnt that actually, instead of waiting for some magic juice that was going to be hastily put onto the market without really any proper testing, long-term testing, I mean, that we've learnt from that actually, although now if you go online, it is quite frightening because you'll see all sorts of strange and unusual reports. Now, I don't know whether they're true or not, and I really hope they aren't, although the evidence does seem to be mounting up that a lot of people have been having severe problems from this one medical intervention that we were cajoled and in some cases mandatedly given, even to the point where if you didn't have this thing, you wouldn't be able to continue with your job. Now, I'm sure that if this is true and all these horrible things of, I don't know, excess deaths, for example, or these wonderful athletes who've suddenly been dying inexplicably, if that's true and is connected to that thing that we've had over the last couple of years, I'm sure the governments would be absolutely horrified. I mean, they wouldn't be able to look themselves in the mirror. They surely wouldn't be able to sleep at night, some of these people, if this was true, of course. And they would certainly be going, do you know what, if ever anything like this reared its ugly head again, we would certainly not be making those mistakes, because we wouldn't want to upset the public. We need the public. They're going to be voting us in or out, depending on. So I'm sure that there are loads of lessons that we've all learnt from this pandemic and the situation that we've found ourselves in, particularly now in a cost of living crisis, where all sorts of strange things do seem to be going on. And I'm sure there are more lessons that we can learn from that. One of the biggest lessons that I've learnt from the last couple of years, I suppose, is just how important my immune system is. You know, my immune system unadulterated by any other medical intervention or procedure putting into me. I've suddenly realised that actually I ought to trust myself, my own body, and not necessarily rely on other people, Big Pharma, for example, telling me what I really should do, or ex-prime ministers telling me that I'm stupid if I don't have a certain medical procedure. I've really learnt how eating proper, good, wholesome food, for example, is, rather than having perhaps too many takeaways or too much processed food in which the nutrients such as vitamins and minerals have been basically reduced, and the wholesome nature of it. I've learnt that actually when you go into, say, supermarkets, for example, that first aisle that you come to with all that wonderful greenery and fresh fruit and veg, that's probably all I really need to get if I can learn how to cook wholesome and natural foods again. The whole of that aisle, and then the meat section, how important having good quality meat would be. Certainly think that that would be the way to keep my health, to exercise, to perhaps not smoke quite so much, not that I actually smoke at all, or reduce my alcohol levels should I drink. But the most important thing, I think, is trying to keep myself healthy by eating a good and wonderful diet, and not being bribed perhaps to have a medical intervention if I can have a free pizza with it. That thing I think would be pretty much an oxymoron. So I'm sure that if the government is learning some wonderful lessons from the last couple of years, they would suddenly be realising just how important, say, farming is for the country, or indeed the world, that actually we should be supporting farmers because they're the ones growing the food that we're going to need. And perhaps that some of the things that, you know, are claimed, these things that seem to be claimed that is going to end the planet with the global warming, perhaps is not quite as truthful as it could be, and that actually we do need the farmers to continue farming and making all that lovely fruit and veg and all those wonderful dairy animals and beef cattle and various other animals that we need in order to get all the most valuable nutrients into our body. And that would be the thing that if I was in government now thinking about what had happened in the last couple of years, I would think, yes, we're going to put all the money and make sure that farmers and good quality food will get access to the people as cheaply and as effectively as possible, so that people never have to worry about food deprivation or starving or shortages like that, because they've surely, benevolent governments across the world, they must have learnt now from the last couple of years that sometimes some of their big top-down policies are not quite as useful to everybody as perhaps local communities doing local things for their community and having the power down their end with farms producing the food in the locality for them. I think that's what I've mostly learned as I take stock now about what's important for the people who are still here and haven't disappeared rather mysteriously.